say anything? Well, it is music and dancing that makes me at peace with the world. And at peace with myself. But I don't see much movement at the back there, you know? I would like us to join. Let's just repeat. Let's just repeat it. Let's all join.
I see you having lots of fun there. Hey, lots and lots of fun.
Yes, yeah. I love this thing. It melts my heart.
I can imagine.
I
can
forget
imagine.
all these things, all the heartaches and all that.
I think it's also very relevant, especially thinking about who we're talking about. In referencing his leadership and the lessons that we have learned from the young man, Nelson Mandela, where there were so many lessons, he was just phenomenal. He was just phenomenal. He was just an awesome gentleman through and through. So our topic for today. Oh, good evening, everybody. Before I just rattle on.
Good evening to you too.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our fourth conference for Mind Your Mind. It's been a month, of true reflection, especially when you start thinking about who this month is dedicated to, and we would like to honor him as well in having a conversation about his leadership and who he was as a person, as a human being, as a father, as a husband, as a friend, as a grandfather, and as a leader, because he was really what we call a servant leader. He was truly, truly a servant leader. And I would just like to actually introduce Dr. Awesome, who's basically going to be our speaker for tonight. And he's going to talk to us about leadership and the lessons that we learned from Nelson Mandela. So over to you, Dr. Awesome.
All right.
Good evening, family. For those of you who are here with us and those who will be watching via YouTube, from our last engagement, we remember that we had some dignitaries joining us via YouTube. And we'd like to use this opportunity to celebrate and thank those who have chimed in at one time or the other via YouTube. And if you're watching via YouTube, I'd like to welcome you onto Mind Your Mind 4.0. I feel very humbled and honored to be working with this great team that you possibly would see on the screen as you watch this. Thank you, Teboho, Nati, Dolly. Thank you, everybody. Tonight, as I began, to sing and dance alongside Madiba's jive. I call it the Madiba jive. Those of us who know the move recognize the Madiba move, and it's a move that is not common. I mean, he has a signature to it, and it's beautiful. And there's a whole lot around that jive that um, dates back to his days back when he was in prison, and a whole lot of lessons that you can learn from that life. And that's part of what I'll be talking about tonight. So permit me to just take it away right now and just move to sharing my screen. And as I share my screen, the one thing that I'd like to just quickly highlight is that tonight is very, very special in several ways, several reasons, because as people, I think the one thing that every one of us can basically learn from is this icon's leadership legacy. And I'll start by telling us a story. As we all know, at the African Institute of Mind, one of our core interests is to help us to mind our minds, which basically means we're trying to help prioritize our well-being, one mind at a time. And for those who do not know, the African Institute of the Mind was set up in 2019, specifically after several engagements with corporate organizations around mental health and mental well-being and mental agility. And I realized as an individual that many people suffer from mental health challenges and they don't know who to run to. They don't understand what it feels like. They don't know how to handle their pressure, their crisis, and how they feel. And so what that gave rise to was the birth of the African Institute of the Mind. I will not dwell too much on that. The focus tonight is on Madiba. And so that leads me to what I will be talking about. Now, Madiba means a lot to a lot of us around South Africa, around the continent, and indeed around the world. For many of us, I'm sure we possibly already know that July 18 is not just Nelson Mandela's birthday, it's also recognized by the United Nations as the International Nelson Mandela Day. Now, I'd like to pause on that and first and foremost say that Nelson Mandela was the only person who had a day to him dedicated by the United Nations as a living being. In other words, long before Madiba passed on, the International Nelson Mandela Day, which interestingly is his birthday, had been celebrated at the United Nations as a day to commemorate Nelson Mandela. And I would never forget when Madiba turned 95. He was going to turn 95, and if we all remember, he was in the hospital around that time. And so much news was going around. People were asking if he was about to die, if there were things that we need to be focusing on, where he will be buried, who will take what, and the media was focused and consumed on all of that, and it felt like broadcasting negativity while a man was sick in the hospital. And I remember I got an intuitive hit. And as I speak right now, I'd like you to, think about something that has hit you in your subconscious that you have taken some action around and become conscious about. And if you've had any intuitive hit, whatever it is about, please type it in the chat box if you can. If you cannot, take a note and just make a mental note on it and write it down. But what is important here is that I had an intuitive hit around that time Madiba was in the hospital. And as I had that intuitive hit, I began to document how to turn around the negativity that was flooding the media space into a positive story. And that positive story for me meant, how about we honor Madiba and do something that will take the attention off this whole conversation around where will he be buried? Is he dying? Which of his children will take what? Who will do what? And I specifically remember around that time, as I had that intuitive hit, I wrote it down, and while I was thinking about it, I remember I was at a conference in Ekurhuleni, and this conference was sponsored by the city of Ekurhuleni. And while I was there, I would never ever forget, the mayor was going to give his closing speech or closing remarks. And I specifically listened with intent to give kind feedback. As I listened and as I gave my kind thoughts and I documented what I noticed he was sharing, standing beside me was the media officer of the city. And I said to him, XYZ that the mayor shared during this event are very insightful, and really and truly, I'd like to share it with you. If you may, you can go and share it with him later on. And he says to me, why should I be the one that will share what you had as an information? And he said, why don't you go and share it with him yourself? And I summoned the courage to go and share what I had received as an intuitive hit with him. To cut the story short, that was how I connected with the mayor of the city. And in sharing that with him, he said to me, he said, who are you? And I told him who I am. And he asked me, what do you do? And I told him what I do. So he said, aside all this, what else are you passionate about? And I would never forget. I said, I'm passionate about making an impact and an input. And if I had my way, I would love to climb Kilimanjaro in honor of Madiba. He looked at his media officer and said, let's set up a meeting with this young man. The rest is history. I eventually sat in a room with the executive mayor that gave rise to what became a trek for Mandela. An entire project I designed and then got the city of Ekurhuleni to partner with us. And the city of Ekurhuleni approached the SABC. The SABC approached various media houses. I eventually reached out to the Nelson Mandela Center for Memory, run by a distinguished gentleman, Mr. Selu Hatang. And that's how the Nelson Mandela Center for Memory endorsed that specific Nelson Mandela 95th birthday climb in honor of Madiba. Why am I sharing this story? I'm sharing this story because I want anyone who is listening there to realize that your passion is pregnant with possibilities. And I dare to say that that in itself is one of the very first leadership lessons that I learned while interacting with Selo Hatang. And I had the privilege to also interact with Madiba's chef. A gentleman who used to cook for Madiba sat with me in the Nelson Mandela Center for Memory as I began to prepare for this climb in honor of Madiba. And he said to me that he remembered as Madiba was growing older and Madiba could not even remember people who were around him. And Madiba's passion became so evident towards the latter part of his life for him more than the earlier parts of his life. Because even though Madiba could not remember who he was, his passion for people was very evident in that conversation. And that was one of the things that I took away from that gentleman who was Madiba's chef. Fast forward to the climb up Kilimanjaro in honor of Nelson Mandela. That fired me up as a person. Regardless of the challenges that we faced over the 6-day climb, I would never, ever forget the passion that that gentleman told me Madiba exuded, that Madiba carried, became one of the key things that stood out for me. And that is the first leadership lesson that Madiba represents. Passion produces perseverance. You see, Madiba found a cause that was worth fighting for. And that became his passion. That became something he was passionate about. That passion fueled the fire in Madiba to the point that he was able to persevere even in the midst of opposition. And we all know how, Madiba led a non-violent action against apartheid in this great country. And it was a choice. And that choice was what landed him in prison and kept him in prison for 27 years. We know the story. Madiba emerged from incarceration. And how did he emerge? These are some of the things that we need to take time to ask ourselves. How does a man take passion and reshapes that passion to the point that it births perseverance? For those who do not know, one of the regular things that Madiba did was that Madiba was one who meditated. Meditation was one of the things that helped to calm his brain. And I say it to everyone who cares to listen, that it takes a lot of shift in the brain for you to come to that place where you are no longer reacting, but you are responding. Madiba said, the struggle is my life. And we all know, he said, I will continue fighting for freedom until the end of my days. The reality is that if Madiba taught us anything, it was to build our lives and our work around a noble cause. If you're listening to me right now, this one lesson is the very first that I'd like you to take away from this conversation tonight. The second lesson is expectation. Madiba always expected the best from people. And so that leads me to highlighting what I'd like to put as a second lesson. Expect that whatever situation you find yourself, it will shift from its state into a success. You may wish to rephrase that and say, expect that, whatever challenge you are facing, can change eventually. In other words, when we think about our lives, always having positive expectation is the only way to go. The word hope means having only positive expectations. And when we have only positive expectations, what happens is that our cells are able to eavesdrop on those thoughts, on that paradigm, on that way of thinking. And as I think about it, the one interesting thing, and is the story that comes to my mind right now, is how Madiba and Oliver Tambo work together with their expectations that things were going to shift. And it was that expectation that drove them to focus on solving problems that mattered. And that then led to the change that was truly worth their while. Ladies and gentlemen, it requires a lot of nerves. And nerves it requires to be able to push through trials. And as we push through trials, ultimately, that will then make us envision this reality that is tied around hope, that is tied around expectations. And this is why many change efforts that fail in our day can be traced back to a failure of nerve. When you think about Madiba, he had nerve. And that nerve was constantly showing and felt in the way he expected good. We know that over and over again, Madiba, from his first prison state in Pretoria, he was eventually moved to maximum prison in Robben Island. Many people don't know that Madiba did not start his prison life in Robben Island. But think about it, from one prison to the other, it took a lot of nerve. And that is the second leadership lesson that I believe Madiba exuded. The third leadership lesson, ladies and gentlemen, is Madiba was always forgiving. You know, and when you think about it, forgiveness is the key that helped him to focus forward. I'd repeat that. Forgiveness was the key that aided Madiba's ability to focus forward. You know, I'm reminded of President Bill Clinton. There was a conversation that is documented that he had with Madiba. And it is said that he woke up around 3 o'clock in the morning to basically watch the press coverage of the historic release from prison of Madiba. Think about it. The time difference in the US and the time zone in South Africa are not the same. For a president to wake up at 3 a.m. to watch another person's release from prison, oh, there must have been some chord that was struck in him. So when you think about your life, what burden are you holding on to because you are not forgiving someone? Who are you putting in prison? Because you may be thinking right now, oh, come on, Joshua, I'm not putting anybody in prison. The reality is that when you are not forgiving a person, it's like you're in lockdown. And the mental lockdown is stronger than this physical lockdown that we've experienced in recent times due to the coronavirus. And the story is recorded that as the television cameras pressed in, Clinton, President Bill Clinton, it is recorded that he said that he observed the sheer anger and hatred on Mandela's face, that as he walked from the cell block to the front of the prison, he was imagining the heartbeat, the rage in Mandela's heart. But what he said he could literally notice was that all of that had vanished. And it is recorded that he eventually asked Madiba about it. And here's what Madiba said to him. I'm surprised that you saw that. And I regret that the cameras caught my anger. Yes, you are right. When I was in prison, the son of a guard started a Bible study and I attended. That day when I stepped out of prison and I looked at the people observing, Madiba said, a flush of anger hit me with the thought that they have robbed me of 27 years of my life. It is recorded that Madiba then said, the Spirit of Jesus said to me, Nelson, while you are in prison, you are free. Now that you are free, don't become a prisoner. The reality is that it takes a listening ear to be able to hear that which is being communicated. And we can only hear clearly when there is no noise. Unforgiveness blocks the ears. It clogs your pathway towards focusing forward. And that, I believe, was one of the key values that Madiba, Nelson Mandela's emotions naturally gravitated towards, from the prison, the anger, the resentment. The truth is, who wouldn't when you think about it? 27 years? Who would not be angry? Until he recognized what was happening. And he made a different choice. The reality is that we need to be choosing right. Because when we are choosing right, we are able to create the inner shift and change that we need. So, and that is the vital lesson there. The next leadership lesson that I believe I learned from Mandela, and I believe you all should learn and take away tonight, is not to try to be right. You see, the story I just told you right now, Madiba could choose that, no, these guys are not right. I'm going to end this right now. But the question that hit him, the thoughts that hit him, brought him into a place and space of consciousness. That when we think right, we don't necessarily have to be right to act right. In other words, ending right versus being right. Which one is better? I think ending right is much more better than being right. Because many of us want to be right. Because when you want to be right, sometimes you don't notice the need to give up your right. Just allowing yourself to be vulnerable brings you into a better space and a better place. In a relationship, social justice, certainly in business, the truth is you can focus your energy on being right. But the question is, would you end right that way? We should focus and think more of ending right. And it begins by thinking right. So I've asked a question on this webinar before, and I'd like to ask it again. What is the greatest amount of money that you've lost? I don't know. I can tell you the largest amount of money I've lost, 2 million rands. Now, I lost it not because it ought to be lost. I lost the money because I chose to end right rather than being right. Some people would say, come on, in business, you don't give in. But the question we need to be asking ourselves is, how many people have been killed because of battles that has to do with money? One of my mentors in Washington, D.C., and I remember him over and over saying this to me, Joshua, you need to be alive to enjoy the labor and the effort of your work. Ending right is better than being right. So being strong-willed, being determined. Nelson Mandela was not a coward. He never cowered in. The question we need to be asking ourselves is, how many of us, ladies and gentlemen, how many of us are constantly, accepting and waiting for things to go right all the time? Things don't necessarily have to go right. They don't necessarily have to go right. We could decide and say to ourselves, I'm not going to allow myself to be limited by whatever challenges that I'm facing. And I share this from a good place, not to judge anybody who has had to take on legal battles around business, but to realize that we're on a journey. And that journey requires that we introspect. I'm not saying you must compromise your principles, but I'm also saying that you need to raise your level of consciousness and ask yourself, is it worth the battle? It is what Madiba understood, that you can't make peace with your enemy if you are not willing to work with them and treat them with dignity. So he taught us about the power of collaboration. He also taught us about compromising. And the one interesting thing that lesson teaches us is that a good leader can engage in a debate, frankly, yes, and thoroughly, knowing that at the end, he and the other side can come closer and also emerge stronger. You don't have that idea when you are arrogant, ladies and gentlemen. You don't have that idea when you are superficial. You don't have that idea when you are uninformed. So whether it is an employee, a customer, a partner, when you engage in a debate, your motive and the question you should be asking yourself, is this going to draw me closer to the person? So to have both sides emerge stronger, will this help both sides to emerge stronger? Or will this lean to winning the argument? Remember, the lesson here is to end right and not necessarily be right. So I begin to wrap up the leadership lessons that I've learned from Madiba by highlighting the last one. And I've talked a lot about lockdown. I've talked about Madiba being in prison. I've talked about a whole lot of challenges. But the one key thing that I'm going to close with is that the change that led to Madiba becoming a change agent and a catalyst began inside him. In other words, the change that led to Madiba from his lockdown to becoming a leader and an icon that many today revere began inside him. So when you think about it, if there was really a silver lining to Madiba's years in prison, Madiba said it was to look into the mirror and create within himself that which he most wanted for South Africa. Remember, South Africa is not just a geographic location. It is a people. So he was thinking, I am thinking peace for the people. I am thinking reconciliation for the people. I am thinking equality for the people. I am thinking harmony for the people. And I am thinking freedom for the people. It's possible that when you think about all this, his most profound impact and possibly his greatest legacy was to teach us through vividly living by example. He first became human before anything else. In other words, Madiba became self-aware. Madiba was aware of himself. And self-awareness is a sign of a great leader. The reality is that Madiba understood that if he was going to lead his nation, if he was going to lead South Africa, if he was going to lead this rainbow nation out of racial discrimination into a peaceful democracy, he would have to be the change. And so as I begin to wrap up on these leadership lessons that I've learned from Mandela, I'd like to highlight one very important thing. That there is passion to be found. And there's no passion found, when we play small. In settling for a life that is less than one that you are capable of. For that to happen, you need to give up your right of being right. You need to allow yourself to begin to embrace internal change. You need to begin to raise your level of consciousness by being more aware. And for that to happen, it's an inside job. Also, you need to realize that it's not about being right. You need to end right. That is more important than wanting to be right. It's also key to realize that the third lesson that I'd highlighted is that for Madiba, forgiveness was the key that helped him to be able to focus forward. The second lesson was expectation. And he always had expectation. And I said that expectation is what gave rise to his continual hope. And I indicated that hope is having only positive expectation. And the very first lesson that I learned from Madiba that I talked about was passion. And as I indicated from the very start, passion produces perseverance. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you've been able to learn, maybe unlearn some things as I shared the leadership lessons from Mandela today. As we approach the end of this mindful moment, I'd like to take us back to our team, and if anyone has any question, I'd like to take it at this point. Otherwise, I'd like us to get into a mini conversation about it before we close with a short mindful moment. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back as we begin to approach the end of our time together. So for those who are watching via YouTube, this is our team, Teboho, Nati, Dolly, I don't know if anything came to your mind, if there's any question or thoughts, or what stood out for you from the leadership lessons.
Sorry, you can go first of all.
Okay. I think one of the things that always stood out for me, especially with Mandela, was the fact that he was always willing to listen, and it didn't matter who you were or where you came from. To him, everybody had to sing from the same hymn sheet so that we were all on the same path, which was very important, which I believe, just my view, that a lot of our leaders have lost that understanding where a person comes from, the whole essence of empathy and understanding people and leading from behind, you know, where when you know that you are leading from behind, if something wrong happens, when people look back, they always look to you. And I think that's one thing that I'll truly, truly miss about him, is the fact that he always knew when to say the right things and when to do the right things, which really, for me, was a big wow, especially when it comes to a gentleman who, like you're saying, was in lockdown for such a long time, that for him to emerge and be such an amazing human being was really, you have no words for it. You really have no words for it. Yeah, that's my bit.
Profound. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Dolly, I see you wanted to share your perspective and what stood out for you, or what was the main thing for you about Madiba.
I think for me, Dr. Awesome, can you
Yes.
hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. For me, Dr. Awesome, what stood out mainly were two things: his passion and the forgiveness part. Passion, I can relate with him. Whenever I do something I love, I'm passionate about it. I don't care whether you like me, I don't care whether you don't. If I want it to happen, it is going to happen. End of story. So that's the one thing but he did it in a calm, humble manner. That was his generation. Unfortunately, we're like pumping and keeping it happening. But secondly, Dr. Awesome, in terms of forgiveness, I think a lot of people have grudges, Dr. Awesome. A lot of people don't want to let go of the anger, and which is sometimes justifiable, especially with the history that we had during apartheid as people of color. So those two things for me, like I always say, if somebody is passionate, Dr. Awesome, say for instance, you're having a bad day and then you meet a homeless person singing. Believe you me, your perception, mindset, everything, makes you wonder and be grateful of a lot of things. Because you're like, there's this person being homeless, singing maybe, oh, happy day. You understand? That's where passion comes in. You can't buy that. It's internal. So meaning the person is aware of, like, you know what, they've brewed that within. So whether you see them as being homeless, that doesn't define them. And the forgiveness part, yeah, I look up to that. It's something I'm still also learning, because sometimes you might think you've forgiven a person, but I'll never forget what they did to me. So I think they go hand in hand. If you're going to forgive and not forget. So those are the two things that stand out for me. And yeah, I'll forever admire and like honor what he left for because of that.
Right. Thank you, Dolly. Yes, sir.
So yes, me too. Probably almost the same, but yeah, passion and the willingness to serve. Most of our leaders today, they don't have the willingness to serve. It's all about me and me, myself, and I type of an attitude. You see, it's pathetic what is happening out there. When you think about it, and you're like, okay, these guys, they they fought for this country, but what is happening now? It's like, if Mandela can wake up now, he would scream. I'm sure on top of his voice, and very screaming. He would scream like, "You guys, uh, we this is not what we fought for. We fought for everyone. Everyone has to benefit in whatever that is happening." Thank you.
Thank you. All right, House, we're just going to close in the next couple of minutes with a short mindful moment. And I just ask us to, if you may, if you can, if you want to switch off your video, you can do that. But please, just in this moment of mindfulness as we close, and for those who are joining us via YouTube, basically right now we will basically ask that you just join us in this short moment, and I will be leading us on this journey, and if you may just close your eyes if you want, otherwise you may just lower your gaze and just take a deep breath in, hold it, and out. The next deep breath in through your nose, hold it, and this time exhale through your mouth. Again, breathe in through your nose, hold it, exhale through your mouth. In and out. One more time, please. Take a deep breath in, hold it, go deeper a little bit more, and slowly begin to exhale. And you may open your eyes. Well, that is us today. If you've joined us for the Mind Your Mind 4.0, I'd like to thank everyone, particularly members of our team, Teboko, Nati, Dolly. Thank you all for your time, for your input. As we close today, I'd like you to go with this mindful state, recognizing that something is shifting in here, even if you don't see it happening out there. A mindful state is the best state you can be. If you've never done it before, try it. Take mindful breaths, even if it's just for a minute or two, and do it every day for the next 30 days. I promise you, when we'll be having the August edition of Mind Your Mind, which in South Africa, for those who know, it is Women's Month, and we're excited and delighted that some executives of General Electric have confirmed that they will be giving us the opportunity to be part of our Mind Your Mind for August. But aside that, I think I'd like to also take this moment to also commend one of our own, Dolly Kunene, who joined forces with some women to put together a great book that we will be talking more about shortly. But I'd like to close by saying to everyone, your life, my life, and every life of every person is important. But you can only appreciate it when you are aware of the fact that they matter as much as you matter. I thank you all for your time, and I wish you a restful evening and accentuating August. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, family.